if we just simply compare somebody who is really sedentary, significantly overweight, insulin resistant, pro-inflammatory, and we compare their health to somebody who is lean, active, and eating at an appropriate level, the difference between those two people is stunning. And my thing is that I think that fasting is great. I think it's a really solid tool, but compared to the individual that is metabolically healthy, I don't know how much more they're getting out of fasting compared to the difference that we're already getting relative to just being sick and sedentary and all that. And it's not a popular position.
And we're live. Robb Wolf is in the building. It's so great for you to be on. I've been drinking your product for the past freaking 3 or 4 weeks, getting my electrolytes in, and I'm feeling amazing. So I'm glad to get and sit down with you. Welcome to the show, man.
Huge honor to be here. The cocaine in the product really facilitates the the uptake. So yeah.
Ever since I moved to Miami, it's all just kind of coming full circle for me. Who would have known?
Exactly. Shocker.
So there is so much to unpack here because you have that. Like, I know one thing personally with me is that I've had a bunch of different gut issues and stomach issues in the past. So I could talk for hours when it comes to gut health and all the different things that are good for us. I would like to start because I think it really gives a good background on who you are and what you've done. And right off the bat, I'm not even quite sure exactly what you do, but I do know that I got a product sent to my house and I'm trying it and using it. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
You and me both. I'm not entirely sure what I do either. So that's fine.
But you seem like a man of many different choices and hobbies, and you seem very multifaceted. So maybe just give everybody a quick understanding of Robb Wolf and what are you focused on today?
Sure. I mean, a really quick background. I had an undergrad in biochemistry, was looking at either medical school or a research track more in autoimmunity and cancer. And it was right around that time I developed a case of ulcerative colitis so bad I nearly died from it. And kind of a long story around that is that the path to figuring out what I needed to do to heal that situation got me into this kind of paleo low carb diet arena. I ended up writing a couple of New York Times bestsellers in the kind of paleo diet genre. There really wasn't a paleo diet tag before I wrote my book. One of my mentors, Lauren Cordain, wrote a book in 2001 called The Paleo Diet. And then it kind of, a low simmer, but I ended up getting attached to the CrossFit scene very early on. I co-founded the first and fourth CrossFit affiliates in the world, and then ended up working for CrossFit HQ for a number of years. And so I was kind of their nutrition guy. So this kind of, food quality, appropriate protein, whole food kind of deal kind of grew in lockstep with CrossFit, and have gone on to be a early stage investor in a couple of different companies like Thrive Market and Beekeepers and a couple other notables. And mainly now my focus is Element, which is the electrolyte product that we sent you, and the cocaine in the first batch again is helps really sink the hook in. But I also have a platform called the Healthy Rebellion, where we're trying to get 1 million people out of the sick care system. So that kind of globally is what I've been up to. Over my shoulder, you can see a thing for a Sacred Cow. I wrote a book with my co-author and also did a film called Sacred Cow, which tries to get into the ethical, environmental, and health considerations of a meat-inclusive food system. So we try to unpack this whole big story around climate change, how animals influence that story, the ethics, the health considerations. So I do wear a couple of different hats. Sometimes I would probably be better off just staying in one lane, but I do have a lot of interests, but they kind of intersect in this kind of health and sustainability world.
Right. But your next mission is always kind of a reflection of the previous one, just expanded upon, and you're trying to tackle it from every angle, such as Elon Musk trying to take down climate change in 4 different facets, right? So all in all, though, you want to improve people's health. You want people to feel better. You want to help. And that's really what you've done a great job on. And personally, I'm really interested in the fasting thing, because fasting is just incredibly good for your body. Intermittent fasting to start. But I know personally, I have an issue with low stomach acid and mobility, generally speaking. And I also love food, right? So like I eat a lot. and that's not good for those two combos. So fasting I found has been like crucial for me, but I'll go 48-day fasts, and that third day I'll feel like such ass and I'll just be drinking water. And it was funny because I was about to start a fast and then your product shows up in the mail. And I normally don't just like promote people's products, but it was interesting because it just showed up at the right time, like when I was doing my own fast, and I started using it and I definitely felt really good. So tell me a little bit about what that does, and let's kind of go into a little bit about fasting.
Yeah, I mean, the naturesis of fasting is this physiological condition that when we are fasted, eating a low carb diet or a low calorie diet overall, our insulin levels tend to drop. And insulin is a hormone that does a ton of different things, but it really helps to regulate blood glucose levels. So if we're eating fewer calories, eating less carbs, eating less frequently, then we have these periods of time where the kind of oscillating insulin levels just go down. When insulin drops, then a hormone called aldosterone drops, and it's an adrenal hormone that's really, again, important for a lot of reasons, but it's critical in electrolyte management, and it causes, its relative levels cause the body to retain sodium. And this is important for fluid balance, for having enough blood in our circulatory system so that the heart doesn't have to pump too hard. When one of the problems of dehydration is that people lose total fluid volume. And then each time the heart tries to contract, it doesn't actually get filled the way that it should. And so it has to start working faster to get the same type of work going. So when people begin fasting, they will oftentimes notice that they have lethargy, fatigue. If they go from seated to standing, they may get lightheaded and maybe even, kind of pass out or nearly pass out. And that is this whole naturesis of fasting story. A really slick way to deal with, you can fast and feel like garbage, or you could fast, address your electrolytes, and feel pretty darn good during the whole thing, which I think really facilitates actually doing it or making it through the transition phase of a low carb diet, like that keto flu in the beginning. And I mean, you could have used pickle juice, you could have used chicken bouillon cubes, you could have used a variety of different things, but you just want to get somewhere around like 5, maybe upwards of 10 grams of sodium per day, in addition to some potassium and some magnesium, and that will offset this total kind of depleted state that you end up in when doing some sort of a fasting regimen or again, low carb or what have you.
So basically you're still able to maintain and stay in a fasted state though, because it's not like, what facet of the powder or the cocaine in a stick allows you to not break that fast?
Well, so I wrote my first article on fasting in 2005. And by 2006, I deeply regretted publishing it because it went out to the CrossFit community. And those people are so type A and over the top that it was like, 6 months down the road, I started getting like this form email. Hey, love your work. I do CrossFit. I intermittent fast. I've had 5 grams of carbs in the last month. I do CrossFit 6 days a week. On my days off, I do hot yoga and a 13-mile ruck march with a 40-pound, weight vest on. And these people end up with low libido, their hair is falling out, and they're having all these problems. And so CrossFit is awesome, but it's a big stress. Intermittent fasting is awesome, but it's a significant stress. You combine all these things together, and they're not just additive, they're multiplicative. And when we start multiplying stress, it can be really bad. So that's kind of a feature of this thing. The other feature is that fasting and the perceived benefits of fasting, like autophagy and cellular recycling and whatnot, it's not an on-off switch. It's a rheostat. There's a dimmer switch element to it. The only time that we're really not experiencing autophagy in some sort of a consistent level is when we are chronically overfed. And really what's happening in that case is that the kind of pro-inflammatory signaling, the Mtor signaling that people are concerned about, it is just pegged on. It's like you stomp the accelerator in a car, you threw a brick on it, and you jumped out of the car, and it's just going.
What was that? Mtor signaling?
Mtor is the gene signaling that people are really concerned about with fasting. It's tied into on the one side, we need mTOR signaling to grow and repair muscle. It's important for immune response. It's important for actually allowing the immune system to identify cancer. But the flip side is that if mTOR is turned on all the time, it is very pro-inflammatory. It's super linked with elevated rates of cancer and neurodegenerative disease. But what people have done, they've looked at the fasting research, which usually is performed in animals that are chronically overfed, chronically inflamed. They're being fed a really poor quality diet, like these lab chow diets, because the scientists want to know exactly what the animals eat. They basically feed them these pellets that are sugar, like whey protein and like corn oil. Like it's the worst quality, nutritional thing that you could get. And then they have some vitamins and minerals in there. So these animals are kind of chronically sick, chronically overweight from just eating their kind of standard diet. If they eat less of that diet, intermittent fasting, calorie restriction, they definitely have health benefits. But there's also, like I did a talk at the beginning of 2020, which got nuked by COVID. And so I'm going to end up releasing this thing, but it's called Longevity, Or We Trying Too Hard? And it digs into all this stuff. So people will get concerned that something, say like Element, or they have a cup of coffee and they want to put like some stevia in it or something, that because the stevia may cause a transient increase in insulin levels, that it kick them out of their fast or, block their fast. But even the work from Walter Longo, where he does a fasting mimicking diet, folks are doing like 500 calories a day, they're still getting these really remarkable benefits. So I know I kind of wandered around there, but the long and short is, from my perspective, people take the fasting topic way too literal. It's like, if you've got something that has 4 grams of maltodextrin or something, and it's what keeps you in the game so that you can stay in a 48-hour fast, that is not the thing to worry about. Like it's not going to kick you out of ketosis. It is not going to blunt autophagy. I think that folks get far too serious and literal in looking at those different things. So I don't know if I fully answered the question, but that the long and short is that there's a lot more latitude within this story of getting health benefits. This should be kind of intuitive, but if we just simply compare somebody who is really sedentary, significantly overweight, insulin resistant, pro-inflammatory, and we compare their health to somebody who is lean, active, and eating at an appropriate level, the difference between those two people is stunning. And my thing is that I think that fasting is great. I think it's a really solid tool, but compared to the individual that is metabolically healthy and a good body weight and all that type of stuff, I don't know how much more they're getting out of fasting compared to the difference that we're already getting relative to just being sick and sedentary and all that. And it's not a popular position. I'm definitely in kind of a minority on this, but a lot of folks like Peter Attia and Rhonda Patrick that have been very pro fasting, I've noticed over the past couple of years, they've really pumped the brakes on that stuff and are kind of, I wouldn't say backpedaling, but they're soft selling it a bit more. There's a little more nuance, like the longer extended fasts are not quite as popular with them. And again, a flip side to all this stuff is, as people age, everybody is going to begin losing muscle mass in their mid to late 30s. And you can lift weights, you can eat adequate protein. That will flatten that particular curve. We know that one will actually work to do that. A strength trained 90-year-old can be as physically fit as a non-strength trained 50-year-old. So it literally can like double your health span. But it's that fasting, if done too often, a little too frisky, it really makes me nervous, particularly for folks that are a little bit, 35, 45, 55 and beyond, because it gets ever more difficult to maintain muscle mass. So like if somebody's using it as a calorie control technique, like they're unwilling to modify their dietary quality, but they're like, I'll eat whatever I want between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. and that works for them, awesome. But I'm a little nervous about like really long extended fasts. Like a 48-hour fast, 72-hour fast once a quarter, I'm totally down with that. A little time restricted eating, which, I do that just because it's convenient. I'm totally down with that. But I've seen a lot of people kind of fast themselves to a degree that they look like if their car slid off of an icy road and they had to climb up an embankment to save themselves. It's like they're barefoot, like they're not going to make it. They're so weak and depleted that and the goal there ostensibly is that they want to improve the duration and quality of their life. But I think an extra day in the gym and a little more protein would have probably facilitated that better. Yeah.
Well said. And then you mentioned like the research done by Rhonda Patrick and some of these other notable people in the field. Is there a particular source where all you guys go to always see the latest studies and understand this? Because it's ever changing.
I mean, I have a couple of Google alerts around different topics. And so I have a couple of them around Mtor specifically and Mtor and nutrient cycling, metabolic flexibility, intermittent fasting, time restricted eating. So, I mean, one of the lazy ways to go about, like you can actually go out looking specifically for things. And then the more passive ways to set up some Google alerts so that when new articles arise, and even on PubMed, you can set it up so that, different topics, it'll land in your inbox. Yeah.
That's a really good life hack for everyone. Like you set up Google alerts for things that interest you. Otherwise, if you don't, Instagram will just throw things in your face instead. So make sure you control that. In terms of the main idea with fasting is sometimes people say you can drink coffee. Sometimes people say you can't. What's your stance on that?
It's so funny. Again, I think that this is majoring in the minors. So we took the person from so let's say they're eating standard American diet. They're eating 2,500 calories a day. Now they're eating no calories. Or let's say they eat 5 calories somehow out of the coffee. Is that 5 calories really completely undoing the delta between 2,500 calories and 0 calories? So I'm kind of like, do coffee, don't do coffee. It is at the end of the day, it's not, in my opinion, and I think the science really supports this, it's not really going to change things. The one caveat I have there is that being in a fasted state is kind of adrenalized. You are really on. From an evolutionary perspective, people who are fasted tend to get these really nice windows of clarity and focus and kind of a weird energy, which I think is part of the reason why folks like doing this. And that's great evolutionary wiring. If you are out of food, it's a great time to be creative and an awesome problem solver and to have outstanding focus. But you've only got a couple of days of window on that. And then eventually, like the tanks are empty and then we start this downward slide. We start getting very, very cold. Our physical activity, like both our desire to do physical activity and then just the little fidgeting that folks do, all of that stuff really decreases and the person just kind of spirals down. And so it's, fasting has some really cool characteristics to it, but I really view all this stuff like a tool. And, a handsaw is amazing. It's a phenomenal tool. Bandsaw is a phenomenal tool, but neither of those would be great to put a nail into a joint and bring wood together. So I think it's folks end up kind of being a little blunt instrument with things like fasting, and they get hung up on like, well, is coffee going to be a problem? And the adrenalized thing. People are very energetic. And I think that coffee on top of that can be overstimulating. That was my whole point to that.
I mean, that would be coffee is just like the best. I mean, like as a functional adult that doesn't partake in a lot of like other vices, coffee gives you that. I mean, you as when you age, you're just like that sipping that first cup of coffee is like legal crack. It's amazing. Yeah. I'm not sure crack has that effect, but I assume it would do something like that. But it just makes you feel so freaking good. Which begs me to understand too, the question, just to kind of move this, is you mentioned that you're doing the CrossFit stuff and all this. When I was younger, I used to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I would slam like, chicken, rice, veggies, and that's what we were used to do. I think that over time doing that is ultimately what caused my SIBO, because I was never giving my body a chance to digest. Now I feel like I'm at like my best health I've probably had in quite some time, but I'm only having like 1.5 meals a day. I'm not getting that much calories. Do you need to bring in a certain amount of calories, or is every body going to be completely different where some like star athletes can survive on 600 calories? Or is there like a pretty general understanding you need X to be at like your fittest?
There's a pretty good understanding that there's a baseline of need, but I think that folks oftentimes overestimate that. And I don't know if you're eating a ketogenic diet or low carb diet, but there's interesting kind of mythology and folklore in the ketogenic and low carb world that suggests that you can eat whatever you want and as much as you want, so long as insulin is low, then you can't store fat. That was a hypothesis that was floated maybe in the early 2000s. Doesn't really seem to have penciled out. Like there've been a lot of studies on it and there's still, battles back and forth, but I do still think calories matter. Hormones definitely matter too. And interestingly though, I think that when people eat a generally minimally processed kind of lower carb diet, I think they kind of need fewer calories, and it may be, 20% less. So if you're eating a more mixed diet, you might need 2,000 calories a day. Maybe you only need 1,800 calories a day to maintain adequate body temperature and reproductive hormones and growth and recycling of all your tissues and all that stuff. So I do. And also it's funny, when I was always super, super active. When we opened our first gym, my activity level became less because even though I was on my feet, like I was a coach then and not really an athlete anymore. And so a lot of this elective time that I would spend doing activities previously, I was comparatively more sedentary. Then I got into online stuff like blogging and podcasting and writing books. And if you want to absolutely rot and destroy your body, do blogging, podcasting, and book writing. It's like when I hunker in to write a book, there's 6 months where I just barely move. I get up and do some physical activity here and there. But the end of a book writing session, like I'm kind of broken, because I just have to focus and get that stuff done. And so my physical activity is like half what it used to be. So my calorie needs are really a lot less. And I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu 3 or 4 days a week. I lift weights a couple of times a week, but my base level activity versus when I was a kid or even like a young adult in college, I rode my bike 5 or 10 miles into college. And then
those are the best
I'd play
days.
ultimate Frisbee. Yeah. I mean, it really was the best days. I tell my kids, it's like, those are the best days of my life, but my activity level is a lot less. And so even the nature of your work, being online and doing this stuff, like it's different. We received, we live in Montana. And so winter is going to be a real deal here. We received 3 cords of wood and I spent a couple of days cutting and stacking that. And like, I noticed that I got leaner in those 3 days just because my food was about the same, but like my basal energy output was probably double or triple what it normally was. Like I noticed just like veins pop up in my legs from doing that because I didn't adjust my eating because I wasn't just sitting on my ass.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. It's interesting you mentioned that because you became your own little biohacker, right? And every single one of us has that potential to become our own little biohacker. And it's like, we are only on this planet for so long. Why doesn't everyone take some time to learn their body and figure out what works for them? So like for me with SIBO, I went through like 2 years and it totally sucked. And I couldn't figure out how to do it. I did all the pills, herbs, all that. What ultimately helped me was the elemental diet. And just 2 weeks of drinking the juice every day. And then eventually that gave me that, essentially just freed up my system to decompose all that toxic waste that's been sitting in my stomach for so long. And you can only imagine there's so many people right now that are suffering from disease that starts in their gut where serotonin's made, and they're not doing anything about it because they don't know, right? Like they don't know that sometimes you need to do a complete flush. So it's interesting just to be a person navigating this system, because I think there's a natural tendency to start off, get really, really overwhelmed, give up, get overwhelmed, give up, get overwhelmed, have a breakthrough. And then all of a sudden you're like over the fence.
Right. Yeah. And, that's been my, the folks that I really like working with are people like you. Like they've ran the gauntlet of conventional medicine and it didn't have the answers. And then I'm kind of like, hey, there's still a bunch of rocks we can turnover. And the cool thing with it is, with a couple of days to weeks of experimentation, we'll know, and we can form a hypothesis, and we can say, well, I think it's, okay, we have SIBO, but is it like the variety of bacteria that is causing like a sulfur overproduction that like may slow gastric mobility, or is it a acid production that is enhancing gastric mobility? And so and so then we can test those things and start figuring out where we go and what the next steps are. And it's super empirical. Like it's not bullshit. Like we should be able, it creates these logic trees, and we can start going down these yes, no logic trees, and eventually we'll get somewhere that is better than where the person is. Like my gut health is far better now. I'm going to turn 50 in January. It's far better than what it was in my mid 20s. And I've continued to make little incremental improvements, just this last 2 or 3 years. I've kind of noticed that fiber in general isn't great for me. So I do a fair amount of like meat and seafood and everything. And then I do some fruit, and that's kind of it. Like if I have a salad, it's a really small side salad, and it's more like tomatoes and cucumbers and not really the leafy greens. The leafy greens kind of hammer me. So I've just continued to tinker and iterate with that stuff. But there is something that folks can do to improve. Like if you still have a pulse, there's somewhere north that you can go to improve things for sure.
That was the same for me. I realized the fiber was actually what was destroying me. And there's so much great books like Fiber Fueled and all these things that are just plant. But everybody is different, and people hate hearing that because everyone just wants the answer. And if you don't get the answer, then you get some angry people, you get opposition. But at the end of the day, the answer is that there is no answer. And the best answer is for you to learn as much as you personally can, become your own professor. So then you can make your own, inferences about all this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's interesting, people like you are doing that. Now I want to just take a step back and more into like the business that you're building with Element. So talk me through like what has the process been of formulating your own packets, and how does one even go about that process? You find a factory, you figure it out. Like can you talk us through like the idea stage to that actually becoming a thing that ships to my house?
Yeah. And we didn't start off with the idea of being salt moguls. Like that wasn't remotely on our radar. I've done low carb diets for 23 years, and I feel great in general on them. But the stuff I do tends to be kind of glycolytic in nature, like physical activity, the jujitsu and kind of CrossFit-esque stuff. And if I fuel for my best kind of like mental health and cognition, I don't have that low gear that one needs for wrestling and jujitsu and all that stuff. And I've just struggled with that over the years. I met these two guys, Tyler Cartwright and Luis Villaseñor, who had founded this group called Keto Gains, where they use a smartly composed ketogenic diet, and they have a couple of 100,000 people in there. And man, people are just crushing it. Great body recomposition, good health transformations. And when I talked to those guys about what I was doing and kind of the challenge that I had, they looked at what I was up to. They're like, I don't think you're getting enough sodium. Like you need more electrolytes, specifically sodium. I'm a pretty good biochemist. I'm not afraid of salt. I salt my food vigorously. So I was like, oh, I think I'm okay on that. Of course, I'm talking to an expert, and what do? I ignore their advice. Of course, that's what you do. That's what everybody does. So about a year went by of me still pissing and moaning and like, oh, I'm having these problems. We're like, no, man, really, like weigh and measure everything, put it in chronometer. Let's see what you are really doing. And lo and behold, I was getting, they were recommending at least 5 grams of sodium a day, and I was only getting less than 2. So I literally went and started like sipping pickle juice, and it was just like a light switch was flipped. I was like, oh my God. And then I went to jujitsu, and I had way more gas than what I normally did. And I didn't feel blown out and smashed afterwards. So I started really diligently addressing my electrolyte needs. And part of what we did with that, these guys had cooked up this thing called Ketoad, which was like this much salt, this much no salt, which is potassium chloride, some magnesium citrate, lemon juice, stevia, water, shake it up, drink it. And we provided a downloadable PDF for this and just gave it away because we knew everybody in our space, like 99% of people, were not properly addressing electrolytes. So it was a really big need that folks had. 6 months down the road, we had 500,000 downloads of this guide. Like it just went like gangbusters,
Wow.
Really, really big deal. And we weren't even savvy enough to make it like an email collection thing or anything. We were just like, hey, here's this, electrolytes are important. Here it is. But we started getting tagged on social media where people were like, hey, love the Ketoad, but when I travel with 3 bags of white powder, the TSA doesn't like that, and because they're humping this stuff around. And the folks that were following us requested that we do some sort of like a convenience play around electrolytes. So we looked into this and we started tracking down like who were some of the best formulators in the world on this stuff. We got our sourcing kind of buttoned up. Because we cater to this kind of paleo low carb scene, these people are generally wonderful people, but they're also kind of the lunatic fringe. Some people are aghast that we use stevia as a sweetener, and other people like, oh, this is great. And so we ended up coming out initially with a citrus salt flavor and a raw unflavored. The citrus salt tastes really good. It's reminiscent of like Gatorade and most of the sports drinks. And if the company failed as an electrolyte product, it makes an amazing margarita base. And so we literally launched with the idea that we would pivot into like drink mixers if this thing failed as an electrolyte product. And then the raw unflavored is for the people who are super purist about everything. And no matter what sweetener we used, it wouldn't be good enough or right enough. And it's like, okay, here's the raw unflavored, and it has the gram of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, 60 milligrams of magnesium. And we launched this initially within this kind of paleo, low carb, ancestral health space, and then have just kind of branched out from there. And now we have all professional sports for the most part that, we have contracts with and are going with that, branches of the military, different health considerations. And it's grown remarkably quickly because it really is the really cool thing is that this is addressing a legit need. When people are electrolyte deficient, they feel like garbage. And then when they address the electrolyte issue, like if they just go swig some pickle juice, if they eat 10 olives and they were low in sodium before, like 5 minutes later, they're like, man, I feel a lot better. Because the two most tightly regulated physiological processes in the body are pH and electrolytes. And if pH goes up or down a little bit, you'll feel very, very sick, or you can die. And the same is true of electrolytes. So if those things are off a little bit, then the first things you notice is like your cognition is a little off, your focus is kind of off, lethargic, fatigued. Once we get to the stage of people cramping, like they're so far down the insufficient electrolyte sodium story that it's really pretty significant. And so the cool thing from a product standpoint is somebody can go from feeling like garbage, they sip on something that is pleasant tasting, and then 5 minutes later, it's literally like a light switch is flipped and they feel wonderful and their performance
I like
better,
to use it.
Cognition. Yeah.
Yeah, I like to use it for the sauna.
It's indispensable for the sauna. We've had the great opportunity to do some work with some NHL teams and players, and these are pretty big guys. They're not NFL size, but they're big dudes, 200 plus pounds. They will lose 10 pounds of water in the course of a hard game or practice. And that may represent 10 grams of sodium that they lose at that time. So we can scale this, based off of size of an individual and whatnot. But a sauna just so increases sweating demands. And when we sweat, we lose sodium at about 100-to-1 clip relative to potassium. So not properly addressing sodium, like if you want to be in the sauna for 20 minutes, 25 minutes to get those benefits of like the increased cardiac output from just the increased heart rate, you need about 20 minutes plus for that. To really get the benefits of heat shock proteins that improve our resilience, you need about 20 plus minutes for that. And then you want to actually be functional after that. And adequate sodium, and again, like Element's a great option, but pickle juice, olives, sardines, salami, just generally making sure that folks have more sodium in and around that sauna period is such an important feature, so that you can actually stay there long enough to get the full benefit from that activity.
A lot of times when people think about hangovers, they think about not having enough electrolytes. Maybe that's like old adage. I'm assuming it is old adage.
It is spot on. No, it is spot on. Like a lot of the poisoning feeling is electrolyte imbalance. And a lot of folks have noticed, like, if they use like something like Element as a drink base, or like they do one drink, one element, one drink, one element, you'll feel rough the next day. Like it still disturbs your sleep. There's still problems with those issues, but it mitigates the nasties by like 50%. Like it's really profound how much it helps that.
Because the two major sources people go to right now are Gatorade and Pedialyte, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So It's interesting that you're mentioning drinking these throughout the night while you're drinking.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Because the alcohol is a legit diuretic. So you're going to be dumping a lot of fluids, and then you'll be dumping electrolytes, specifically sodium with that. And so it's a great way to stay ahead of all that stuff. You're still going to feel rough, but it's going to be less rough than what it would have been otherwise.
Yeah, that's probably the most important thing that's been talked about today. But
most important life hack.
What I'm really curious about is the IVs. Some of my friends, I've yet to do one, and I really look forward to it. But some of my friends were telling me just like they had some really, really bad days where, next thing you know, they're two bottles deep on some wine, and they wake up and they have like their kids play and they're just screwed. They call over the IV guy, they put an IV in for an hour, and they feel good as new. Can you explain how that happens? And is it literally that simple to just like cure a hangover using one of those IV things?
Yeah. And I mean, some of these folks are getting pretty sophisticated. They're putting in some glutathione or some glutathione precursors. And glutathione is one of our main antioxidants and super important in liver detox. But most of the kind of the headache, the fatigue, the brain fog is mainly from electrolyte depletion. Like it's if anybody's ever gone from eating a pretty carby mixed, standard American diet and then went full keto, they feel like they have a hangover for like 3, 4, 5 days. And it's because of that natriuresis of fasting, the loss of sodium, which can be good for some circumstances. Like if somebody is hypertensive and they have high blood pressure, that losing the sodium in the body water is really good initially. But then if you feel like garbage indefinitely, then that, it's going to be really hard to stick to that. But the IVs can be really powerful. I think you can accomplish virtually all of that from just oral rehydration, but you have to really aggressively do it. It's worth noting that when Gatorade was first launched, like we had one of our customers go to the Gatorade Hall of Fame. They were at like a Florida Gators game. They went in there and checked it out. And in the package, it was 1 gram of sodium originally, instead of the like 150 or 200 grams of sodium now. So they've dramatically increased the sugar and decreased the sodium in the product. And originally they're really pretty spot on when they first had that.
Have you ever felt that throughout your career of doing all this different research, starting these different companies, writing all these New York Times bestsellers and doing all this stuff, do you ever get really sort of depressed and just think like, wow, I haven't done shit in my life and like I'm not doing AXB, even though you have these past accomplishments? Do you ever get that feeling that ultimately is like the down before like the next come up? And if so, can you describe like what that's like and how you kind of get out of those feelings?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in some ways, like it feels like peeing into the wind sometimes. Like you go to a major sporting event or something, and you kind of look around, it's like people are really unhealthy, and they are doing the best job they can, but people have pretty challenging, complex lives at this point, like split families and unsure work environments and everything. And something that I think is empowering, but also kind of insightful, the poorest folks in our society, if they walk into a 7-Eleven with like $10 in their pocket, they have more options for amazing tasting foods than like any Pharaoh of Egypt, any Roman emperor. Like the snack aisle, the sodas, the energy drinks, like there's more options there than has been available to like any ruler of any empire up until maybe like the 1950s or something like that, and that is so powerful a way for people who are living a difficult life to have some control over one goddamn thing that makes them feel good, which is like food and these things like that, you know. And I think like TV shows and social media and stuff like that can kind of plug into some of these things too. And it does feel overwhelming in that it's like, you know, like if I travel and I end up at a jujitsu studio, usually somebody will recognize me. If I travel and I go to a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's, you know, so, hey, you're Robb Wolf, you know, somebody will probably recognize me. If I go to the DMV, nobody recognizes me, you know, anywhere ever, you know. And so there's this whole huge demographic that, despite my best efforts, despite, you know, 20 years of work, I don't know how much impact I've made on that. And we did a project 10 years ago with the Reno Police and Fire Department where we identified folks. It's well understood within police and fire circles that these folks tend to die young. And our thought around that was that some preventable metabolic disease processes were going on. And if we could find these people early and intervene in the people that were really sick, we could get some benefit. So we did some advanced testing. It found 40 of the most high-risk people within the police and fire departments in Reno via advanced testing, got these folks a health coach, got them moving towards kind of a lower carb paleo type diet, modified their sleep and exercise, got some buy-in from the leadership so that even though these people are still on shift work, they were much more consistent. Before that, it was like a randomized shift work. And if you want to destroy people in quick order, like randomizing their sleep is an amazing way to do that. But based off the results we got from that program, it's estimated we saved the city of Reno about $22 million, and with a pretty conservative 33-to-1 return on investment with that program. So I've been working for 10 plus years to try to scale this thing. And like I did a little bit of work with the Chickasaw Nation. They developed a similar initiative, and they have kind of been growing that internally and doing some work on it. Naively, when we first wrapped up this thing in Reno, and this was probably back in 2011, I guess, I was like, oh, within 5 years, we're going to transform medicine. And, you know, clearly medicine is not transformed yet. Because in my mind, I was like, dude, this is like Moore's law applied to medicine. Like, you know, it should get cheaper and better, and we should be able to do better things because we're doing stuff right. And who can turn down a 33-to-1 return on investment? Like, even if we scale it and it's a tenth of that, like a 3-to-1 return on investment, like if you give me $1 and I give you 3, when do you want to stop that? Like, never. Right. You know, like that's amazing.
I guess it's a little bit like Bitcoin. No matter how good the deal is, someone's always going to be skeptical. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so I've continued to try to scale that, but it's the pathology of the medical system is the only thing that's larger than the pathology that is in the people within, you know, our system at large. It is so broken. All the incentives are so oblique and damaged. Interestingly, right before COVID, and I had predicted this a couple of years ago, I told my wife, I'm like, we're going to start getting some reach outs from people in Central America and some developing countries that are facing this diabetes epidemic, but because they don't print their own money, they're going to have to figure out a way to, no joke, deal with this epidemic that is poised to bankrupt Western societies. And so there was a small nation in the Caribbean and then a nation in Central America that had reached out to me, and they wanted to spin up these early diabetes metabolic health initiatives and try to get people focused back on traditional foods and decouple from the industrial, you know, food system, the global industrial food system. Unfortunately, COVID completely nuked all of that, and I think worsened and deepened a lot of these problems. But there are solutions out there, you know, and it is interesting. Going outside of the United States might be the place. So my next thought, like kind of the next thing, is maybe going outside the United States to try to get buy-in with folks that are only a couple of generations removed from a legit traditional food system that fed and watered them wonderfully and kept them healthy. And it had a diversified economic impact because more of their populace was involved in the production of the food, more of the food was consumed locally, and there was pride associated with that and everything. And so that's some of the stuff that I'm looking forward to. But I don't think, I'll continue working within kind of westernized societies on this stuff, but there's so much inertia and money put into kind of selling the opposite perspective on this, that I think it's easier to just kind of go around that and go to a spot where that isn't happening yet.
Yeah. You could talk on so many different topics. I really want to get like a 3-hour podcast with you in the future. It's interesting how no matter what, people need something bad to happen a lot of times before they'll make a change. And I was even the same way, right? Like you have to have something bad happen, and then you're like, oh shit, like I can't just push this back anymore. I have to make this happen. It's interesting that no matter what, we could know like smoking's bad for us. But like, if nothing's happened and you haven't had lung cancer, you're fine. The issue is whenever that first thing happens, you just hope that it's not the end of the things. It's something that's preventable and curable. So if you're having issues, it's kind of a blessing in disguise, because you'd rather have those issues than something 10x worse.
The bigger one later. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And we're always growing that and just always trying to get more. And that must crush you just as like a health person that's always trying to get people better, to just not seeing people take the advice. But it is also really interesting that you built a community and you've been in this space long enough where people recognize you when you go around, and you have changed lives. You're actively speaking on these things. When you're wrong, you say you're wrong. When there's advice, you say, hey, this is advice. This isn't fact. And I think that's a big reason that's been such a huge part of your success.
Yeah, thank you. I've had a couple of mentors that ended up being huge narcissists, and I've tried to do exactly the opposite of what they've done. And it was you learn both what you might want to emulate and those things you don't want to emulate from certain mentors and influential folks, and really trying to remain humble and open to change. And there aren't too many hills that I will like die on, and this is an emphatic truth. I think that there are generalities that can be applied, and then we have to get in and start getting granular so that we it's germane to each individual person, which is, I think, kind of that biohacking ethos and whatnot. Yeah,
I love it. So if you could go back, and I know we're coming up on time here, and you got a million things you got to do, but if you could go back in time before you wrote any of these books, maybe like right after school, and you could have told yourself 1, 2, or 3 things that could have saved you just a ton of time, money, headache, heartache. And a great answer is I wouldn't have done anything because it made me who I am today, right? But what are some of those things that, looking back maybe at 20, you could have wished you told yourself and implemented?
I was super impatient at 20, and like the notion of working on something for 2 or 3 years just seemed insurmountably long. But the reality is that 3 years is going to come and go no matter what. And you have a choice between, like whether you want to learn guitar or language or whatever, like, can you carve out an hour a day, an hour every 2 days to invest in this thing, whether it's writing a book or a business idea or, developing a skill set like a language or musical instrument. And I was just really impatient. Like I just kind of wanted stuff to happen now. And I really wish that I had learned that, chop wood, carry water kind of perspective a lot earlier, and that that a little, it's compound interest. I don't need to do the whole thing today, but I need to do something today. And then I do a little bit more tomorrow and a little bit more tomorrow, 1% better, because that compound interest, once I'm 3 years into practicing guitar, learning a language, learning some coding, whatever it is, I've really got somewhere. Like if somebody's going to jujitsu 3 days a week and they're 4 or 5 years into it, they're probably getting close to their purple belt or something, which is legit. Like that is a really legit milestone within tackling a career in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You're probably halfway to your black belt by that point. And it didn't happen all at once. It just, you showed up, you logged the time, and I was late figuring that out. Like I really wish that I had, looking back, when I had all the energy and all the piss and vinegar and everything, like which to your point is part of the reason why I didn't do it. Like I could still kind of out muscle things and just work harder than everybody else. But God, I wish I had been a little smarter with that stuff. Yeah. Because you don't always you won't always stay young. At some point you might have kids. Like I have a 7 and 9-year-old daughters, and there's just kind of, no matter what type of like time saving life hack I do or whatever, I'm still a dad, I'm still a husband. There's still those needs there. And so like the amount of uncommitted windows of time that I have now relative to pre-kids, it's a joke. Like I thought I was busy before. Like I was just a slapdick and had no idea how much free time I had on my hands. I just thought I was busy prior to that. So I wish I had learned some of those things before and been able to drive things a little bit further, a little bit faster before.
Ideally, you can learn that somehow before having a kid, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But that's awesome, man. I appreciate you so much. How can, if everyone wants to get more Robb Wolf in their life, do you have a podcast, do you have a show? How can people get more of you?
We do have a podcast. The name of the podcast is Healthy Rebellion Radio. And then we have a community with the same name, the Healthy Rebellion. I do a lot of writing for Element, and that is over at drinkelement.com. And so I do writing on fasting, ketogenic diets, and all kinds of different things. I do have social handles like Instagram and all that stuff, but I write stuff and have my assistant post it. And I can't go on there anymore. Like I'm trying to figure out, this is a next step. I'm trying to figure out if I spin up like a Substack or something like that and really try to aggregate my presence in places that I feel like aren't openly antagonistic to our health and well-being and the censorship deal and everything. Like I'm disinclined to provide any additional value to some of these tech platforms. But at the same time, they're also an amazing medium for reaching people. But I've been doubling down on trying to go on, high value podcasts like yours, because it's an opportunity to get some of these ideas in front of folks and then, circumvent some of what I see as being squirrely stuff going on within the social media scene. If I could wave a magic wand, I so wish we could bring ourselves back to like 2005, 2006, everything's on a blog, everything's on a forum. There is no Facebook, there is no Instagram. That was really kind of a golden age where and forums could get crazy. Like you could end up with trolls and everything, but there was just at least the algorithm itself wasn't like pitting us against one another. I think when you're dealing with an environment like that, like it's really tough to navigate that successfully.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And then if you do one thing wrong, the shadow ban and interesting times though. Interesting times. There's never a lack of stimuli in today's world. It's just figuring out your best way of navigating it. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, Robb, we appreciate you, man. Until next time, I hope we can run this back again because there's so much, and I appreciate you, man.
Ian, I will bring down property values anytime you want to do it. So thank you.
All right, man. Take care.
Thank you for listening to another episode. Remember, hope is not a strategy. Keep making moves. Till next time, peace.